Let's just talk about why it's important to reduce the deficit over the long term. Ultimately, if we do not reduce the deficit, your taxes go up. The services that the government is able to provide for you would decrease dramatically, and the government's flexibility to respond to crises like the one we saw in this past recession would also decline. These are all bad things, to say the least. Gene Sahadi on CNN Money has got a great article on this to say, if we just let this go, Roland Martin, if we just let this go, eventually we will have 8 cents left of every dollar to be able to spend on government priorities. Should the president focus on the deficit before we see a meaningful drop in unemployment, Roland?
Look, I don't understand why Republicans and Democrats don't understand that you can actually do both. So let's have some honesty here. First of all, on the Deficit Commission, it was a Republican idea. When the president said, fine, create it, Republicans didn't want to do it. So therefore, he had to do it himself. And so they, frankly, failed their fiduciary responsibility to the American people. But also, the American people should stop lying to us every day. The CBS poll this week showed it best. They don't want any increase in taxes, but they also don't want any cut in Social Security and Medicare. The House Republican Conference put forth $2.5 trillion in cuts, did not touch defense. And so you can't keep sitting here lying and playing games here. But also, we also have to be honest. We talk about spending. Well, guess what? The Republicans sat here and wanted tax cuts in the stimulus bill. 1/3 of that project was tax cuts, but they still didn't like it. We had the tax cuts for the rich, but then we say, well, it's good for them, but also don't put money in infrastructure. So make up your mind what you want, because frankly, it's confusing. David
makes this point always. He makes the point that you're going to have to attack this on a few fronts. I want to give people an idea of what I was just saying before we talk to Roland for a second. Take a look at the expected federal tax revenue in 2020. Okay? According to the Government Accountability Office, 92% of revenue will go to pay for, as Roland just said, Social Security, interest on our debt, Medicare, and Medicaid, leaving 8% or 8 cents on the dollar for everything else. So, David, the reality is, if you don't talk about Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and defense, you are left with very little to actually cut. How do we deal with this?
Ali, everything has to be on the table. Social insurance reforms, defense and other spending cuts and reprioritization, comprehensive tax reform that will raise more revenue, among other things. Look, here's what we need to do. We need less government consumption spending, more targeted investment, renewed innovation and partnership with the private sector. In addition to that, we need to reimpose tough statutory budget controls as part of the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling limit, that will have meaningful pay-as-you-go rules without trillions in loopholes, tough but realistic discretionary spending caps that does not exempt defense and homeland security, and in addition to that, specific debt-to-GDP targets that will kick in at about 2013, 2014, with automatic spending cuts and tax surcharges if Congress does not act.
You have been very consistent. David's been very consistent at saying that over the years, regardless of administration. Roland, any of that going to happen?
Yeah, but here's the deal. He left one thing out. You need politicians with guts. We saw this week where the mayor of Camden, New Jersey, said, look, we got a $26 million shortfall. Police and firefighters and city employees, I need you to have a pay freeze and pay more for health care. They said no. She whacked 45% of the police force. Now people are upset. Governor Jerry Brown in California, he's been saying tough love. You had David Patterson in New York who said, we've got to change. Albany said, no thanks. We don't want to listen to you. Now Governor Cuomo is saying, I might have to shut the government down. And so the taxpayer, the average person, has got to stop demanding more, but then saying, I don't want to pay taxes. If you don't want to pay more taxes, you're going to have to slow down spending and also stop spending and making priorities as to what we really care about.